May papinandit po Kapampangan, to my thesis advisor, members and chair of the panel, program head, the dean, our vice president for academic affairs, and to all, a pleasant day. I am Joel Papus Mallari, MAED, Gen Sci candidate, the presenter at this moment, and is honored, and I now respectfully presenting to your presence my thesis entitled Development and Evaluation of a Compound Teacher's Guide in Science 3, under the Faculty of College of Education, Graduate Studies, Pampanga State Agricultural University, Magalang, Pampanga, May 2021. The study focused on the development, evaluation, and validation of a compound teacher's guide, or KTG, in Science 3. The research material presented the different stages and processes to be considered in crafting the teacher's guide. Descriptive-developmental research design was applied to obtain the numerical data deduced from the evaluation and validation tools administered. Purposive or selective sampling technique was employed in determining the efficiency of the material. The findings of the study used the arithmetic mean as a measure of central tendency, revealing that 22 of 30 of the criteria evaluated were rated excellent by 5 science and 5 MTB teachers. The criteria evaluated are the objectives, content and organization, manner, presentation, layout, and the degree of usefulness of the KTG. Whereas 7 criteria out of 9 language considerations in the KTG validated were rated strongly agreed by a group of 5 language experts. With the result of the evaluation and validation, the KTG in Science 3 is categorically functionable and purposeful in providing teachers another guide in teaching science that is contextualized after the learner's Kapampangan language. Teaching guides such as those used in science teaching in the Philippines were prepared in response to the basic goal of education of the K-12 Enhanced Basic Education Program. These TGs were created to help teachers prepare lessons for the concerned learners to become productive, worthy, and competitive young scientists of the country. Although this was the vision of science teachers to educate all students in science in preparation to become citizens in a tech-driven society like the Philippines, the effectiveness of teaching guides is seen as limited, uncontextualized, and not adherent with the MTB-MLE program needs. Thus, the vision and the emphasis that education should reach all children regardless of their socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity, language, skills, or disability are not maximized. In review, the Department of Education, or DepEd, mission vision statement runs parallel with all these equities of learning, which is to protect and promote the right of every Filipino to quality, equitable, culture-based, and complete basic education where students learn in a child-friendly, gender-sensitive, and safe, motivating environment. In this process of adopting a new DepEd curriculum, the use of mother tongue multilingual education, or MTB-MLE, mode of instruction, aside from it being a separate language or subject, and contextualization was highlighted and given special focus of use, starting in from the kindergarten up to grade 3, to support the goal of every child a reader and a writer by grade 1. MTB-MLE refers to the first language first education, that is, schooling which begins in the mother tongue and transitions to additional languages, particularly Filipino and English. It is intended to address the high functional illiteracy of Filipinos, where language plays a significant factor since the young learner's own language enables them to express themselves easily, and is also encouraged active participation by children in the learning process because they understand what is being discussed by the teachers concerned. Young learners can immediately use their mother tongue, which is the first language, or L1, to construct and explain their world, articulate their thoughts, and add new concepts for what they already know. However, the offering of subjects like, for instance, science falls short in terms of the sufficiency and efficiency of learning materials. To date, K-12 resources are only limited with the available learners' materials, or the LMs, and teachers' guides, or the TGs. Hence, it is in this aspect of investigation where the researcher aims to develop a compound version of a teaching guide, particularly based on the existing TGs in science to enhance the existing DepEd Teacher's Guide in Science 3. This will not only serve as a guide of teachers, but a bridging material where contextualized and MTB-based lessons will connect or will be connected linguistically and contextually upon the materials for grade 4 learners, which uses Filipino and English as the language of instruction. The purpose of MTB program is to develop appropriate skills, enabling children to operate equally in different languages, starting with the mother tongue. The Kapampangan language, one of the 19 mother tongue languages used by DepEd, is spoken in the province of Pampanga, southern towns of Nueva Ecija and Tarlac, northern sections of Bulacan, Bataan, and pocket villages of Eastern Zambales, including Olongapo City. The language is now gaining a better hold as one of the priority languages of instruction in this region. With this, several researchers have demonstrated the significance of local language use in learning science like Kapampangan. The Master of Science is mainly a matter of learning how to talk science. The science lessons are language lessons as well. The language of science is viewed as difficult and abstract by many learners, with words, scientific concepts, for instance, energy, power, and work being completely new, especially to elementary grade pupils. Moreover, knowing the meaning of scientific concepts is not enough to learn science, but it is also necessary to understand the relationship between the concepts and how they create larger patterns with great communication facility, which is language. But how children learn language should also be looked upon, which can vary depending on their language environment. The teaching and study of science is teeming with all kinds of technical words and terminology, thus comprehending science jargon also brings challenging tasks for teachers to teach these technical terminologies to students, especially those who do not have access to special dictionaries and those that are about to learn the subject for the first time. As such, a compound TG, for instance, is seen timely and appropriate, since this training resource, or the TR material, will bring down technical definitions translated in the localized level and will be contextualized accordingly. The Summer Institute of Linguistics believes strongly in enabling local languages communities to strengthen their identity and heritage while empowering learning and growth. Although K-12 Enhanced Basic Education Program started its implementation in 2012, the use of available teacher's guide was not readily available for teachers to use. The TG in Science 3 was not made available until 2015 when the Science Teacher's Guide First Edition came out. A reprint edition followed only in 2017, and no more reprints were made. This later edition, as what was initially seen in the first 2015 edition, also followed the basic outline of the K-12 curriculum with 4 quarters representing the whole school year. However, these editions were not even revised accordingly as per the needed corrections and updates needed by science teachers and users. Moreover, despite the official DepEd directives to teach science subjects like science, using the MTB format of language instruction, no available TG was released in any of the 19 languages. The use of TGs and LMs are already considered as one of the flexible resources in the teaching and learning system, but as what was requested by curriculum experts and seen by several TR critics, the availability of TGs written in any of the official MTB languages are not yet available. However, the limitation of learning materials needed not only by the learners but firstly by the teachers is one of the problems apparently seen. Concerns like the provision of learners' support materials or the LSM, class size, shortages of suitability or suitable qualified teachers, preparation, adequate training, difficulty of translating technical entries, and insufficient mother tongue instructional materials are among the many restrictions seen by various stakeholders. With this, the development of a compound teacher's guide is expected to augment the much-needed teaching materials that adheres to the requirement stipulated in various DepEd orders and memorandums. Young learners can expect a better way of learning science with the use of compound-based contextualized instruction and customs activities from their respective science teachers. Teachers of MTB and Science will have more expanded view on how to utilize compound-based instruction, right from the preparation of DLLs, IMs, BOWs, to the actual delivery of lessons in science. School administrators can also see the improvisation of teacher's guide as a supplemental material that can provide instructional help to concerned science and MTB teachers. Future researchers can also use this strategy and find ways in expanding study, as well as the review and reformulation of needed updates and revisions of instructional materials or management, at least in Science 3 and in the MTB-MLE program in general. In this study, a structured approach type of theoretical framework was adopted. Hence, instead of going directly from one set of surface structures to another, competent translation work have gone through seemingly a roundabout process of analysis, transfer, and restructuring, which adhered to linguistic aspects of translation and needed contextualization of content. With this, the approach must more accurately reflected the expected output with good translation materials, and a more efficient method of translation technique was observed. This framework also favorably reflected DepEd's own conceptual framework of science education under the K-12 Curriculum Guide in Science, which proposed the development of a new learning resource. As a review, DepEd's conceptual framework in science is designed around the three domains of learning science: applying scientific knowledge in a real-world setting, performing scientific skills, and demonstrating scientific attitudes and values. DepEd's conceptual framework in science, as stated earlier, is designed around the three domains of learning science: understanding and applying science knowledge in local setting as well as global, providing context whenever possible, performing scientific processes and skills, and lastly, developing and demonstrating scientific attitudes and values. The conducted research employed the input process output method, or the IPO, which was seen helpful in developing the KTG in Science 3. DepEd's K-12 curriculum, content in science, and the organization of the KTG in Science was used for the acquisition of data and information. For this study, all lessons from the fourth quarter of Science 3 were considered in the development process. It could be seen in the diagram that input constituted the content analysis of existing DepEd-issued teacher's guide and other available learning processes or learning resources, including multilingual dictionaries, thesaurus, and elementary science books as supporting references. Hence, the DepEd TG for Science 3 was the sole basis and sources of all the topics developed. In the process, KTG was developed. This included meticulous translation and contextualization of topics vis-a-vis the careful duplication and organization of the content and activities from the main source material, which is the DepEd TG. An initial draft was developed, which was then presented to the researchers, advisors, and consultants for further comment and development. To make sure of the efficiency of the developed KTG, it was also presented, evaluated by selected science teachers and master teachers, and validated by Kapampangan language experts and reviewers. STs and MTs all came from the City Schools Division of San Fernando, while language and literature experts came from the BLR of DepEd Central Office, Center for Kapampangan Studies, Katatagan Incorporated, Commission sa Wikang Filipino, Center for Talqueño Studies, and the Bureau of Learning Delivery of the Department of Education Central Office. The science teachers and master teachers use a modified version of checklist, which is an assessment paper that contains items describing the KTG developed in terms of objectives, content and organization, manner of presentation and layout, and the degree of usefulness, with a corresponding scale ranging from 1 to 5 after the works of Gueco in 2006 and Likert in 1932. While the LEs, or the language experts, use a validation tool after the work of Castro in 2020 to check the needed language considerations. After this, the results collected from the checklist were tallied, tabulated, and statistically treated. And finally, the output is the developed KTG in Science 3 for teachers. The essentials of supplemental materials developed KTG will serve as an effective tool for teachers of science in engaging learners to have active discussions in Science 3 in a regular classroom scenario. With expected KTG, teachers will have a better chance to deliver better their lessons to their respective learners with a contextualized method that is based primarily on the multilingual format of instruction in the delivery of topics and corresponding activities or exercises for better comprehension in Science 3. The researcher aimed to develop a Kapampangan teacher's guide in Science 3 that would be available to science teachers. This is to further assist teachers to fully understand the underlying fundamentals of Science 3 and the much needed preparations. and supplemental instructional materials or IMs. Specifically, this study aimed to answer the following questions. Number one, what topics in Science 3 are to be included as focus material in the proposed KTG in Science 3? Second one is, how may the developed KTG in Science 3 be evaluated by science teachers and master teachers based on various categories such as the objectives, content and organization, manner of layout and presentation, and the degree of usefulness will be evaluated. And lastly, how may the translation of the developed KTG in Science be validated by language and literature experts in terms of the type of orthography to be used, parallelism, and faithfulness of content translation from source language or the SL to the translated language or the TL, consistency of language expression, level of comprehension, and translation reversibility between the SL and the TL will be the main focus of validation review. Methods. The descriptive method of research was employed in the KTG on all of the topics in Science 3 for teachers. As generally seen, descriptive method determines and reports the way things are and or describes a situation based only on observation, case studies, or surveys. More so, the data gathered was considered as an essential tool in accomplishing the desired purpose, and that is the daily lesson log preparation, contextualized instructional materials or the IMs in the shortest available time and the best lesson delivery possible. Instruments. The main instrument used in this study is the Science Teacher's Guide for Science 3, issued by the Department of Education. Translation guides and references came from various multilingual dictionaries and thesaurus, multilingual science books, translation guidebooks, praise books, grammar books, orthography guides, and DepEd's various editions of Science 3 learners' materials. The researcher's qualification to conduct this type of study also merits his translation activity. He is a former science high school teacher, a language reviewer commissioned by DepEd IMCS in 2012, 2014, and DepEd BLD in 2017, 2018, and 2019. He is also a lexicographer with published dictionary materials in 2011 at ACAU Center for Kapampangan Studies, where he worked as resident researcher for 10 years, an award-winning book writer, illustrator, and layout artist of Grade 2 MTB-MLE learning resources, and most recently as a lead writer of Teacher's Resource Guide in MTB from July to November 2020. I modified the evaluation checklist after the works of Hueco in 2006 and Guzman 2008 and Palayo in 2011 was utilized by science and MTB teachers. While a validation tool for language and literature experts adopted Castro's work in 2020, for the overall development of the proposed KTG, the checklist contains the following categories: objective, content, and organization, manner of layout and presentation, and degree of usefulness. A 5-point rating scale after Likert in 1932 was employed for the evaluation checklist, which has scores of 5 as having a descriptive rating of excellent and 1 having the descriptive rating of needs improvement. As planned, there was a 30-item statement in the checklist. These were categorized as follows: 5 for objectives, 9 for content and organization, 9 items for the manner of presentation and layout, and 7 for the degree of usefulness. On the other hand, the validation tool used a 4-point rating scale, having 4 as strongly agree and 1 as strongly disagree. The tool had 12 item statements to be rated based on language considerations. The study utilized the Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate instructional model, or the ADDIE-ID. Educators, instructional designers alike use the ADDIE-ID method as a framework for designing and developing educational and training programs like this proposed study. The sequence in this method does not impose strict linear progression through the steps, thus making it more flexible and useful because of having stages clearly defined facilities of implementation of instructional and training tools. The following was the workflow followed in the development of the KTG outline after the ADDIE-ID method was employed in this study. Analyze. Preliminary preparation used a DepEd text-based learning resources. Teacher's Guide for Science 3, K-12 Science Curriculum, which were all obtained from the LRMS office of the DepEd San Fernando. Design. All the topics found in the existing DepEd TG for Science 3 were the main content source in the development of the proposed KTG. The design is more of a meticulous translation and conceptualized version of DepEd TG, in Kapampangan with a layout that followed the existing DepEd TG with the following content outline. Title of the lesson: background information, selected word entries from the quarterly budgeted topics, available or possible contextualized examples in Kapampangan, and objectives, materials, procedures, assessments, and assignments. Evaluate. Upon the completion of translation and contextualization of all the topics from DepEd, the KTG was presented to teachers, the science, and the master teachers and language experts. Computation of mean scores was employed in the statistical treatment of data to provide answers to the specified problems, which was given by the descriptive range of means and interpretations. Results and discussions. Table 1 presents the topics included in the KTG Teacher's Guide in Science 3, which is based from the K-12 Science Curriculum Guide. As gleaned from the table, the topics for first quarter are under matter with solids, liquids, gases, proper use and handling, and changes in materials. For quarter 2, the topics are about living things in the environment with sense organs, animals, plants, heredity, and ecosystem. For quarter 3, force, motion, and energy with moving objects and electricity. And for quarter 4, Earth in space with surroundings, weather, and objects seen in the sky. This is in line with the requirement stipulated in various DepEd orders and memorandums. Table 2.1 shows the evaluation results of the objectives in terms of the frequency of the responses. On the evaluation of science teachers, all of the 5 criteria under the objectives of the material were rated excellent by 5 or 100% of the 5 qualified evaluators, agreeing that all objectives are clearly stated and well defined, relevant to the lessons, obtainable and measurable, stimulate the development of critical thinking, and the significance of the material is well described. Or MTs. All 5 criteria under the objectives of the material were also rated excellent by 5 or 100% of the 5 qualified validators, also agreeing that all the objectives are clearly stated and well defined, relevant to the lessons, attainable and measurable, stimulate the development of critical thinking, and the significance of the material is well described. Overall, the 5 items under the objectives were all rated excellent both by the STs and the MT evaluators, with each item being rated as perfect 5 of the Likert scale. Hence, it is undeniable that all science and MTB teachers or evaluators unanimously favored all the sets of objectives of the KTG based on the excellent ratings given. And with these excellent ratings, the KTG's objectives also affirms the very objective of the writers and conceptualizers of the Teacher's Guide for Grade 3, the main source material of the KTG, which is that the Teacher's Guide should be written in response to the basic goal of education under the K-12 Enhanced Basic Education Program. Table 2.2 depicts the evaluation results in the content quality in terms of frequency responses. Both the STs and the MTs have unanimously agreed and all gave a perfect mean score of 5 different aspects, numbers 2, 4, 7, 8, and 9 of the content quality. They believe that the content completely supported the objectives, facilitated comprehension and retention of information, significant, contained adequate samples exercises, and was flexible enough to be modified. The MTs have provided a lower mean score of 4.8 for 3 items. Items 1, 5, and 6, in contrast with the STs who gave these items a perfect mean score. This shows that the MTs believe that there are very small flaws in the accuracy and definition of the concepts, the sequencing of the content, and the difficulty level for the target readers. Lastly, there is one item criteria, number 3, that both STs and MTs have rated with a 4.8 mean score, which means that they both believe that there are just a few grammatical mistakes in the material. Table 2.3 also shows evaluation result in the manner of presentation in terms of frequency responses. The STs gave all the items in this category a perfect score of 5, though the MTs deducted just 1 point in 3 items, numbers 1, 3, and 8, resulting in a mean score of 4.8 for those aspects. This indicates that the MTs have slight issues with consistency, the sequencing, and the difficulty of the lessons and topics. Both agree, however, that topics themselves are easy to follow, clearly presented, helpful, and well organized. Table 2.4 also shows evaluation results in the degree of usefulness in terms of frequency responses. The STs have rated all items perfectly and the MTs have done likewise save for one aspect, number 5. This means that the MTs believe there is a small deficit in the engagement of the material towards active exploration, though both groups believe that the teacher's guide serves as a tool for instruction, are student-oriented, helps increase the interest of the students, effective, meets the student needs, and is useful to the students overall. Depicts the validation results also in the manner of presentation in terms of frequency responses. On the evaluation of language experts, a majority of the items, 7 out of 12 characteristics, have been rated a perfect 4, which stands for strongly agreed on the scale used. The validators believe the translation of the items used proper orthography, faithful to the content, comprehensible to the target audiences, synonymous to the English version, easily understandable, readable, and descriptive and narrative. 3 items, numbers 3, 6, and 11 were given a mean score of 3.8, indicating that one member of the validation team has given it a lower score of 3, which represents agree instead. This means that at least one member of the validators believe that a few improvements could be made when it comes to the consistency of compound expressions, the accuracy of the backward translation, and the syntactic form of the Kapampangan language. Finally, which were items 9 and 12, were given the lowest mean score of 3.6, where 2 out of 5 members of the team gave a score of 3, with the rest providing a 4. At least 2 validators thought that the flow of the translation and the word choice in translating English terms could use a little more improvement. Overall, the mean score for all considerations is 3.911, which still firmly gives it a descriptive rating of strongly agree despite the proposed improvement. Conclusion. Based on the findings of the study, the following conclusions were drawn. The development and evaluation of the Compound Teacher's Guide in Science 3 were done following the IPO outline of development, with the input being a critical review of the DepEd issued Teacher's Guide, with copies of the K-12 curriculum for Science 3. The development of a KTG in Science 3, formulating the objectives, translation, and contextualization of content from the English TG acting as the process, and the evaluation validation of the material as the final output. Secondly, the evaluators rated the Kapampangan Teacher's Guide in Science 3 as excellent in all 4 categories: objectives, content and organization, manner of presentation and layout, and the degree of usefulness. Likewise, the validators rated the KTG in Science 3 as strongly agree in all language considerations. The purpose of evaluation and validation by scoring method is to satisfy each of the criteria that were set as part of the policy guidelines in the development of the KTG material. And with this, the results also favorably adhere to the requirements stipulated in various DepEd orders and memorandums, particularly DepEd Order 21 Series 2019 and DepEd Memorandum 82 Series 2017. Therefore, having these results, the KTG is categorically classified functionable and purposeful in providing teachers another guide in teaching science, contextualized after the learner's Kapampangan language. Recommendations. The researcher recommends the following: attention to the grade 3 level standard, competencies and domain strands of Science 3 with respect to the use of KTG in Science 3. Number 2. Be encouraged to further enrich the content of Science 3 learners' material and further update the corresponding teaching guides. And lastly, continue performing periodic evaluations and validations of learners, materials, and teaching guides in science. Having this recommendation signals the end of my presentation. To my thesis advisor, member and chair of the panel, program head, the dean, our vice president for academic affairs, and to all, a pleasant day. I, Joel Mallari, Gen Sci candidate, the presenter of my topic entitled Development and Evaluation of Compound Teacher's Guide in Science 3 under the Faculty of College of Education and Graduate Studies, Pampanga State Agricultural University, May 2021. Salamat at pasibayo, maya pong pinandit kaya kongan.